right, let's go ahead and get to those poll numbers that we've referenced now a couple of times. So a lot of interesting things here, a lot of data points that could point really in either direction in terms of which party is going to do the best in the midterm. So let's go ahead and put this up on the screen. This is from NBC News. They find that Biden's approval is 42%, which is terrible, but actually is a little better than he had been previously.
Yes.
The Republicans lead the Democrats 47 to 55 in terms of, 47 to 45 in terms of the generic ballot. So they have a 2-point edge. You've got voters ranking threats to democracy as the #1 issue ahead of cost of living. That was a surprise. And you have 57% saying the Trump investigations should continue as opposed to 40% who say it should stop. If you dig into the article that they have here, they also say it paints a mixed picture of the 2022 midterm landscape. As I mentioned, President Joe Biden's job rating is mired in the low 40s. Republicans narrowly lead on the congressional preference. And by the way, if they lead at all, that means they're going to take the House because of the way that these districts are ultimately drawn. But with Democrats nearly tying Republicans on voter enthusiasm, that is different because earlier in the cycle, Democrats very apathetic, Republicans highly motivated. So the fact that you now have Democrats tying Republicans on voter enthusiasm is a big deal. And as we mentioned before, cost of living dropping to the second most important issue, and I think jobs is #3, and threats to democracy #1, which, could mean any number of things to any number of people, and very hard to say which party actually benefits from that being the top issue. I think your instinct would be like, oh, well, Democrats are talking about January 6th and the fake, they're worried about the fake electorate scheme and all of this. But we saw some polling previously that said basically the parties were tied, or Republicans even had a little bit of an edge in terms of overall who voters thought were more sort of trustworthy with democracy.
Yeah, threats of democracy to a media-trained ear is like January 6th.
Yeah.
To some people, it's like voter ID or like voter laws or whatever.
Well, I mean,
or stop the steal.
No, it's stop the steal. To more
I'm
people,
saying you
it's
put
like,
everything.
So if you're a Republican voter who believes the election was stolen, you consider that a threat to democracy, and that may well be your #1 issue.
The reason I always think these are just a little bit silly is, look, cost of living is #2 and #3 is jobs and economy. So I'm like, okay, you obviously combine the two and you get 30%. So it's like that obviously dramatically
Economy is still,
the rest.
Put those together.
You put it
because
together.
it's not like people—
They're not inextricable.
Right, and people aren't just offered sort of an open-ended, like, what do you think is the most important issue? They're given a list of choices to pick from. And so I actually went back to look at, how did this compare to the last NBC News poll and the issue ranking? And they didn't even ask about threats to democracy. So it was hard to even have a baseline comparison. And I also just think that people are pretty bad at assessing what they're actually going to vote based on and like what's really shaping their view of the party in power, the potential candidates that they have to evaluate. So, but I did think that that was interesting that there was something other than inflation as #1, just because every poll we have seen for months and months and months now, that has been the #1 issue.
No question. Let's go to the next one up there, which is also quite fascinating in terms of the overall image of Democrats and Republicans. Not a great sign. So images of Democrats is 34% positive, 51% negative. Not things that much better there for the Republicans. 34% positive, 49% negative. Fascinating.
Yeah.
Image of Biden, though. This is where things get very interesting. He's 40% positive, 48% negative. Trump, 36% positive, 54% negative. Harris, 32% positive, 50% negative. And Pence, 25% positive, 44%. So I think that, the overall takeaway, that Trump favorability rating, that's basically the same it's been since like 2017. 36, and those people, they don't just like him, they love him. With Biden, I think it's a little bit softer, but also there's a reason that his negatives are not as high, because people don't hate Biden, they're just like, whatever.
Yeah.
Outside of certain people, whereas most of the people who hate Trump really, really, really hate Trump. My personal favorite is the Harris positivity figure at 32%, and Mike Pence also at 25, which, if you're Pence, maybe you look at that and you're like, oh, there's no way I could beat Donald Trump in a Republican primary. But apparently these people are delusional enough in order to think that that is somehow possible. I think, of course, on top of this, Dobbs really did change everything. Let's put this up there, which is that 68% of Republicans expressed a high level of interest in the upcoming election, expressing either a 9 or a 10 scale, versus 66% for Democrats. But the 2-point GOP advantage is down from a 17-point advantage in March and 8 points in May. And the pollsters said that the increase in enthusiasm is almost entirely attributable to the Supreme Court decision. And that was always the issue. The reason why everybody thought it was going to be a blowout in March and in May was because Dems didn't have any real reason to come. They felt very apathetic. Obviously, the Inflation Reduction Act hadn't happened. There was no, there's no legislative achievement, complete stasis on top of the economic wreckage. Well, now they have a reason to get registered, to get involved. And when that happens, it erases the ability of the massive sweep that we were probably going to see in the Senate, and it introduces that uncertainty combined with candidate quality, which could result in Democrats keeping the Senate. So that is kind of how I look. It's like a confluence of so many different things that feed into one another.
Midterms turnout is king, because it's all about, are your voters motivated enough to show up? Did you give them a reason why they're going to show up and vote for you?
Yes.
Because obviously turnout is much lower in midterm elections than it is in presidential years. So which side is able to motivate their people and get them out, that is usually determinative. If you think back to 2010, the year I had the glory of running for Congress, the big problem for Democrats nationally, where they just suffered, what Obama characterized as a shellacking, was their side was just completely demoralized and apathetic. They just didn't show up. And on the other side, the Tea Party energy was raging at the time, and they were highly, highly motivated to turn out. So I still think Republicans are extremely motivated. That's why, this is going to ultimately, I think, end up, if I had to guess, I'd say this is going to end up being a very, very close in terms of which party performs better. With Dobbs, you now have given Democratic voters a very clear reason why they should show up and vote, and what is at stake and what is on the line. That's showing up in some new data of who has been registering to vote post-Dobbs. So we covered the results in Kansas, where the pro-choice position prevailed overwhelmingly, even in a state as conservative as Kansas, on that ballot question about amending the Kansas state constitution. Well, part of that story was the fact that you had a massive wave of women post-Dobbs registering to vote and then showing up to vote on that ballot initiative. But there's some new data that indicates it's not just Kansas where this phenomenon is occurring. They look in particular, let's go ahead and put this up on the screen. They look in particular at Wisconsin and Michigan. These are states where, who controls the governor's mansion and who controls the legislatures is really going to matter in terms of what the abortion landscape looks like in the state. In Wisconsin, you have women out registering men by almost 16 percentage points since Dobbs, and you have Democrats making up 52% of all those newly registered voters, compared with 17% of new voters registering as Republicans. So you have a gender gap that is sizable, and you have a partisan gap that is even more sizable. In Michigan, the story is not quite as dramatic, but similar portrait that the registration numbers paint here. Women out registering men by 8 percentage points, Democrats out registering Republicans by 18 percentage points. Interestingly, and this is part of what made this data so compelling, is in states where abortion access is not really at risk. For example, New York, they don't see this gender gap, and they don't see this partisan registration gap. So it really is in the states, like, the more viscerally people feel like their vote is going to be connected to what happens in the post-Roe environment, the larger these numbers are and the greater the disparity is. So it's pretty compelling evidence that Dobbs is driving a lot of voter behavior right now.
I think that's quite obvious. And, it was dramatically underestimated, I think, by the Republicans. And they are still flailing around. They really don't know what to do with the message. You see this over and over again. And you have some of these candidates which are really shooting them to Tudor Dixon, saying not even exceptions in the life of a mother. Once again, you can hold that position if you would like, but you are running in a definitively purple state. So it's not exactly.
She was like the moderate candidate.
No, I know. That's just like, and actually you're doing yourself no favor by running on that nationally and continuing to defend it. I mean, one of the things you should conclude is they actually believe it. And okay, that's fine. I respect this country and its freedom of beliefs, but don't be surprised then if a dramatically unpopular idea they continue need to defend is going to punish you at the ballot box.
Cable news is ripping us apart, dividing the country, making it impossible to function as a society, and making it impossible to know just what is true and what is false. But the good news is they are failing and they know it.
That is why we're building something new, a new mainstream, a healthier one, something more trustworthy, something that we are going to need in one of the most pivotal times in American history. We are building up here for the midterms, for the upcoming presidential election, but we need your help. So if you can help us out by becoming a premium member today at breakingpoints.com, we're trying to change America for the better and the entire world.
So what are you waiting for, guys? Go to breakingpoints.com and sign up and help us build a new mainstream.